Modern games require such insane system resources that it seems crazy to someone like me who grew up on a low-end PC. People often hold barely optimized titles in high regard, forgetting that we once had superior visuals without upscaling or ray tracing. Today, I want to discuss games from a decade ago, or even older, that still look incredible, featuring fluid animations, sharp textures, and none of that Vaseline blur over the screen. Let's dive in. Honestly, firing up this game today is a massive reality check. We have modern titles turning high-end graphics cards into expensive space heaters just to render a puddle, and then you look at MGS5 from way back in 2015. Kojima and his crew whipped up the Fox engine, which ended up being a ridiculously robust, reliable piece of rendering witchcraft before the suits at Konami put it out to pasture. You can run this game on a literal potato and it still hits a flawlessly fluid 60 frames per second. You gallop across the dusty dunes of Afghanistan or the damp jungles of Africa, and the game never breaks a sweat. It makes you wonder what the hell happened to optimization in this industry. But the real magic trick is how it handles the gritty details. A decade ago, a lot of games made everything look like shiny plastic action figures covered in baby oil. MGS-V actually nailed how materials are supposed to react to light. When Venom Snake is crawling through a storm, his sneaking suit gets legitimately caked in muck and mud. The fabric looks heavy and wet, the metal of your rifle has that dull, scratched-up military matte finish, and the lighting just works naturally whether you're staring at a blazing sunrise or hiding in the pitch-black shadows. We definitely have to talk about the movement too, because the animations are absurdly agile and accurate. Playing this game kinda spoils you for anything else. You can be in a full dead sprint, dive face-first into the dirt to dodge a spotlight, roll seamlessly onto your back and pull out your tranquilizer gun all in one slick, unbroken sequence. There are no clunky robotic pauses where your character stands there like a dummy waiting for an animation cycle to finish. You actually feel like a legendary mercenary instead of a shopping cart with a terrible turning radius. Most importantly, tying back to that whole Vaseline blur issue ruining modern releases, the Phantom Pain is crisp, clean, and completely clear. There is no heavy, smeary anti-aliasing trying to cover up terrible performance. When you bust out your binoculars to scout a Soviet outpost from a rocky ridge, you actually see the individual guards walking their routes, not some fuzzy blob of pixel soup. It is just raw, native clarity that lets the gorgeous art direction breathe without relying on fake frame generation or upscaling crutches. It proves that sharp, smart art design beats brute force processing power any day of the week. The Witcher 3 is such an amazing game and showed exactly how an RPG should be. So much love for the work CDPR did on adapting the books to a series. And still, after all these years, I don't feel like any game has come even remotely close to capturing the brilliance of The Witcher 3. Like the graphics part, because this game is kind of the perfect example of how strong art direction ages way better than just throwing raw power at the screen. Back in 2015, this thing already looked crazy, but what's so great is why it still holds up. I mean, really, Witcher 3, it's not doing anything magical by today's standards. No insane ray tracing dependency, no AI upscaling doing half the work for it, though they have been added through the next-gen update, but the game really doesn't need it. It just looks already so good. The lighting has this soft, natural feel to it, especially during sunsets or foggy mornings where everything kind of blends together in a believable way instead of looking like a tech demo screaming, "Look at my reflections, bro." And the world itself that CDPR made here, it's so detailed and it's dense in a way that really makes it feel lived in. You walk through Velen and it's muddy, miserable, full of dead trees and broken villages, and yeah, it's not pretty, but it's visually consistent. Then you hit Skellige and suddenly it's all cold winds, sharp cliffs, gray skies, completely different vibe, but it still feels like the same game. That consistency is doing a lot of heavy lifting. A lot of newer games look amazing in screenshots, but fall apart when you actually move around. Witcher 3 stays believable in motion, which is way more important in my opinion. The vegetation is another thing people forget. For 2015, the amount of grass, trees, and just general clutter in the world was kinda crazy, and it all moves. Wind actually affects the environment in a way that feels subtle instead of overdone. It's not trying to show off, it just quietly sells the illusion. Character models are interesting too, because yeah, if you zoom in hard enough, you'll see the age. But during actual gameplay and dialogue, it still works. Geralt has enough detail, the armor has weight, and more importantly, the animations don't feel stiff. People shift around, blink, make eye contact. Basic stuff, but it's the kind of stuff that keeps a game from feeling dated. Some modern games still mess this up and end up with characters that look like mannequins with expensive skin textures. Also, the game doesn't drown itself in post-processing. There's no constant blur smeared across the screen trying to fake depth or hide imperfections. The image is pretty clean, which is honestly a big reason it aged better than a lot of games from that era that went way too hard on effects. And yeah, if you compare it side by side with something brand new, you'll obviously see differences. But when you're actually playing, riding through a forest, storm rolling in, music kicking in, it's such an immersive vibe. That's the thing. Really, not all about being technically perfect, but holding up when everything is in motion. Moving right along to a game that honestly makes a lot of current-gen shooters look like absolute jokes, Battlefield 1. When DICE dropped this World War I mudfest back in 2016, they really captured a lightning in a bottle. You can jump back in BF1 today and it is still a wildly humbling experience for model hardware. I am talking about an older title that absolutely refused to compromise on visual fidelity. I think the way, honestly, that raw, gritty, artsy style of the game carries it so hard. I've personally just played the single-player campaign because I'm not really a fan of multiplayer online stuff, but I am pretty sure the online mode itself is very impressive with a very high player count too. And for this game, you do not need an overpriced graphics card to make this game sing. It looked great and run with nice 60 FPS even on a 1650. But the secret sauce keeping the visuals alive, the real reason the trenches of France and the blistering deserts of Sinai still look incredibly sharp is, I think, with photogrammetry in the game. Instead of having an exhausted artist sit in an office trying to digitally paint a convincing rock or a slab of splintered wood, they dragged their gear outside and scanned physical, real-world objects. They mapped those authentic surface textures directly into the Frostbite engine. So when you were pinned down in the mud on Passchendaele, that muck looks thick, wet, and miserable because it is based on mathematically accurate scans of actual dirt. The ground actively deforms from artillery shells, forming craters that fill with rainwater, which then realistically reflects the apocalyptic sky above you. That same obsessive detail carries over to the guns you are holding. First-person shooters live and die by weapon models, and the metalwork here is really amazing. The brass on the rifles catches the sunlight, the wood grain on the stocks looks heavily weathered from trench combat, and the barrels physically heat up and distort the air around them when you are laying down heavy suppressive fire. And since we were talking about raw graphics, we have to talk about the destruction physics, because modern games seem to have completely forgotten how to let players break stuff. There's so much stuff you can break here. Get your tank running over a building, see it come falling off brick by brick, it's all so satisfying. And also, the overall lightning, animations, foliage, all looks so believable, it's perfect.
Müdafaa ederek yürümemiz şart. Şu gavurun bölüne saldır.
I think Naughty Dog has this amazing habit of making games that look so good they make other developers look lazy. And Uncharted 4 is basically their mic drop moment for the PS4 generation. This thing came out in 2016, still makes me question whether my PS5 games are actually that much better looking or if we've just been coasting on diminishing returns for the last 8 years. And well, I guess it's mostly the latter. For me, the first thing that smacks you in the face is how well detailed everything is without feeling like visual noise. Nathan Drake's character model, the details, the clothes, the shirt wrinkles, his shirt gets wet and actually clings to his body realistically, picks up dirt and mud as he climbs through ancient ruins. His hair moves naturally in the wind instead of looking like a solid helmet of polygons. And when he gets soaked crossing a river, water doesn't just appear on him like someone applied a shiny texture, it drips, it runs down his face following the contours of his skin, it pools in the fabric of his clothes. This is the kind of obsessive attention to detail that separates Naughty Dog from studios that just check boxes on a feature list. And it's crazy to think this game was made in just 2 years. Damn how good we had it. Even the PC port, which is my way to replay the game every year by the way, also runs so well. Good FPS even on lower-end cards. And also for the environments in Uncharted 4 like Madagascar, Scotland, Italy, every location feels like an actual place that exists in the world rather than a video game level someone built in a month with barely any attention to detail. This from what I think other games feel like, developers create whatever assets, maps they want to make first, and then the writer comes up with the story to try to piece it together. But in Uncharted 4, it's hey, actually, the treasure is not here, and so now Drake goes to a whole different country, different regions. It just feels really uncompromised to me. And in the environments, the foliage density is honestly just so good, and pretty stupid when you think about how much processing power it was take. Well, that's the magic of pre-baked maps. The jungles are packed with plants that all move independently when you brush past them, with leaves that catch light individually and cast proper shadows. And it's not really a visual spam either. You can read the environment, spot handholds, Identify paths forward because Naughty Dog actually understands that pretty graphics are worthless if players can't navigate through them. But like the top thing, the lighting system in this game is what really keeps it from aging. Golden hour sunlight filtering through jungle canopy, the harsh Mediterranean sun bleaching out Scottish highlands, or the soft blue twilight during stealth sections. Every scene is lit like a cinematographer actually gave a damn, like God rays used deliberately to guide your eye and create atmosphere. Indoor spaces have this beautiful interplay of natural and artificial light, with torches and lanterns casting warm, flickering glows that interact with dusty air particles floating through ancient tombs. It's just so frickin' moody without being fucking stupid dark like how you can't see what you're doing in some games. But it is apparently a lost art in modern game design. And one thing I noticed in Naughty Dog games that even playing on lower FPS, there is just something that even with 30 FPS, the game feels so smooth and cinematic. And I think it's because of the character animation, and Uncharted 4 really flexes that, really makes most other games look like they're stuck in 2010. Like when Drake climbs, he reaches for handholds with visible effort, fingers grip realistically, his body weight shifts convincingly as he swings from ropes. When he's scrambling up a muddy slope and loses his footing, the recovery animation flows naturally instead of snapping back to an idle pose like most games. Combat animation blends seamlessly between shooting, melee, and movement, with none of that janky transition stuff where your character briefly turns into a mannequin while the game figures out what animation to play next. The facial animation during cutscenes still competes with anything released today. You can see genuine emotion in Drake's eyes, watch his expressions shift subtly during conversations, notice little micro-expressions that sell the performance. It never crosses into that uncanny valley territory where characters look creepy and lifeless, despite technical prowess. Everyone feels human, which is shockingly rare even now. What Naughty Dog really understood is that spectacle needs substance. Yeah, there are these massive set pieces where buildings collapse and you're sliding down muddy hillsides while trucks explode around you, but they're not just chaos for chaos's sake. The destruction is directed, choreographed in a way that keeps you oriented and in control even when everything's going sideways. Physics feel weighty and consistent. When a rope swings, it has momentum. When Drake lands hard, you feel the impact. Nothing feels floaty or disconnected from the game world. Really, what Uncharted 4 proves is that artistic vision and technical execution working in harmony will always beat raw horsepower throwing polygons at a screen. The game has a consistent visual language, a deliberate aesthetic that serves the story and gameplay rather than just showing off what the engine can do. That's why it doesn't feel dated even though it's running on hardware that's now 2 generations old. Games that chase bleeding-edge realism date themselves instantly because technology moves forward and makes them look quaint. Games with strong art direction and solid fundamentals, well, those age like fine wine, and Uncharted 4 is basically a vintage bottle that gets better every time you revisit it. Plus, let's be real, the game still runs at a rock-solid frame rate without needing AI upscaling or frame generation or whatever black magic modern games require to hit playable performance. That's proper optimization from a studio that actually finished their game before shipping it, and it's exactly why Uncharted 4 remains a benchmark for what console graphics can achieve when developers aren't rushing to meet arbitrary release dates.
Okay, should be on the other side of the bridge. Hang on tight.
Nate?
Hold on! Oh, I hate bridges! No!
Turn around! We're heading for the falls!
I can't!
Remedy Entertainment has always been that weird Finnish studio that makes games nobody asked for but everyone remembers. And Quantum Break is their love letter to time manipulation, particle effects. This one also came out in 2016 for Xbox One and PC. Now, if I recall, the game when launched had a shit ton of bugs and issues, but I recently replayed it and it performed really decent and looked amazing. The time manipulation effects are where this game earns its place on this list, because Remedy didn't just slap a slow motion filter on everything and call it a day. When you freeze time, you get this crystalline fracturing effect where the world shatters into stuttering fragments. Debris hangs suspended mid-air with visible distortion halos around each piece, and light bends through these temporal anomalies in ways that shouldn't be possible but look absolutely spectacular. It's science fiction nonsense presented with such visual confidence that you buy into it completely. Particles scatter and freeze in three-dimensional space with proper volumetric presence. You can walk around suspended dust clouds and see individual motes catching light from different angles. And like the destruction physics tied to time powers remain some of the most satisfying in any game. When you blast enemies with a time dodge and they shatter into frozen fragments before exploding in reverse, there's this beautiful chaos of geometry, particles, and lighting effects all happening simultaneously. The fact that all this destruction persists in the environment instead of magically cleaning itself up adds to the visual storytelling. By the end of combat encounters, areas look properly devastated. Lighting is Quantum Break's secret weapon for avoiding that dated look. Remedy clearly studied how light behaves in enclosed spaces, through windows, bouncing off reflective surfaces, and they implemented it with borderline obsessive attention. The Monarch headquarters has this cold, corporate fluorescent lighting that contrasts beautifully with the warm, late-afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. When time stutters, light sources flicker and strobe with this unsettling rhythm that sells the reality-breaking chaos. And now, one of the most unique things about this game was the live-action show integration. It was really this ambitious experiment that honestly still feels weird. But from a pure visual perspective, the way they blended game graphics with filmed footage was technically impressive. The junction sequences where you make story choices have this slick presentation with holographic interfaces and time-fractured video feeds that shouldn't work but kinda do. Whether the actual show episodes are good is debatable. Okay, they're pretty mediocre, but you can't deny the technical ambition of trying to seamlessly merge two completely different mediums. What really makes Quantum Break's graphics hold up is the art direction's commitment to a specific aesthetic. Everything has this clean, almost clinical look. Lots of glass, steel, minimalist corporate architecture that contrasts sharply with the chaotic time-breaking effects tearing through it all. It's order versus entropy visualized, and that thematic consistency gives the game a memorable look that isn't trying to be photorealistic. The temporal corruption spreading in environments creates these fractal, crystalline patterns that are genuinely beautiful in an alien, unsettling way. Reality literally breaking down into geometric fragments and stuttering loops is a strong visual concept executed with real craft. Now, the wisdom here is that Quantum Break represents this weird middle period in gaming where studios were pushing visual boundaries on hardware that was already showing its age, resulting in these ambitious but flawed experiences. It doesn't have the polish of a Naughty Dog production or the raw technical muscle of a DICE shooter, but it has identity, personality, and genuinely creative visual design that stands out in a sea of brown military shooters and open-world checklists. Like, the time effects alone remain so much more impressive than most modern games' entire visual toolkit, and that's because Remedy actually built their entire aesthetic around a central concept instead of just throwing every graphical feature at the wall to see what sticks. The Order 1886. People tore it apart at launch for being a painfully short interactive movie, and yeah, the gameplay mostly consisted of hiding behind waist-high walls and suffering through quick time events. But if we are strictly talking about graphics that stubbornly refuse to age, this game is an absolute freak of nature. Ready at Dawn dropped this strictly for the PS4 back in 2015, and I think if you just stick the current year release date on the box right now, nobody would even blink. They leaned incredibly hard into a photorealistic style, and they nailed it so perfectly that it still feels completely unreal to look at. The real trick they pulled was how obsessed the developers were with actual real-world optics. They didn't just build a standard 3D environment, they actively simulated physical camera lenses inside the game engine. The depth of field, the subtle film grain, the way the light catches the thick dust floating in the air inside an abandoned Victorian hospital, it all mimics a physical movie camera to a terrifying degree. The materials and textures are honestly still some of the most convincing I have ever seen. And one of the best parts, especially for the time, was how the game handled transitions. We really take it for granted now, but back then, seamlessly shifting from a gorgeously lit cinematic straight into actual gameplay with zero loading screens or noticeable graphical downgrades was so mind-blowing. You'd be sitting there watching a tense conversation and suddenly the camera just drifts behind Galahad's shoulder and you're in control.
Damn it, Bailey. Always forgets to keep the comms center door locked.
Infamous Second Son. This is a game that basically carried the early days of the PS4 on its back. Infamous Second Son is kinda crazy to think this came out way back in 2014, practically at the dawn of that console generation. Sucker Punch built a stunning, super-powered sandbox out of Seattle, and they absolutely nailed the gloomy, rainy vibe of the Pacific Northwest. You run down the street after a heavy downpour, and the wet asphalt beautifully reflects the city lights, the traffic signals, and the overcast sky without ever tanking the frame rate. But the absolute star of the show is the particle system. When Delson absorbs the neon power and you do that light speed dash up the side of a skyscraper, it is a dazzling display of gorgeous, glowing graphics. Every single spark and streak of neon physically casts its own light onto the surrounding brick buildings and those slick, wet streets we just talked about. Then you switch over to the smoke power, and instead of just spawning a flat, transparent gray cloud texture like games used to do, you turn into this thick, volumetric mass of floating embers and ash that realistically drifts and breaks apart in the air. The sheer volume of individual particles bouncing around the screen during a heavy, chaotic firefight is staggering. All of this chaotic, colorful action gets delivered in a wonderfully crisp package, which I think really validates my point about native resolution. This was right before the gaming industry caught the sickness of covering everything in temporal anti-aliasing sludge. When you are perched way up on top of the Space Needle looking down at the city skyline, you get a clean, aggressively sharp view of the world below. It is a wildly colorful, superhero trip of a game. Let's pivot to a game that will really make you feel cold just looking at it. Crystal Dynamics really flexed on this sequel after the 2013 reboot. Like, you boot it up today, and right out of the gate, you are like trekking through this incredibly hostile, thick, freezing mountain range in Siberia. The snow is so atmospheric here. The snow technology alone is enough to put modern winter levels to shame. Instead of pasting a flat, white texture on the ground, the developers built a system where the snow actually has physical volume and depth. And we have to talk about Lara Croft herself, because the character model work here was really so ahead of the curve in details. They upgraded their physics system to something called Pure Hair, which honestly sounds like a bizarre shampoo commercial, but in action, it is amazing. The hair reacts to the wind, gets soaked, clumps together when she goes for a swim, and catches the light naturally. It totally kills that awful, stiff helmet hair look that plagued action games for years. Her skin also reacts to the weather perfectly. If she's freezing, she looks pale and miserable. When she gets dragged through a muddy, collapsing tomb, the grime physically cakes onto her clothes and face in thick layers. You can literally watch her get beaten down by the elements over the course of a few hours. The lighting and materials completely sell the survival fantasy. When you crack open a glow stick or light a flare in a pitch-black cavern, the harsh light bounces beautifully off the wet stone and the ancient ice. The frozen walls look like actual glacial ice, refracting the light instead of just looking like cheap blue glass. And now, tying back into our main problem with modern graphical blur, this game runs incredibly clean. Whether you are scaling a massive, sun-drenched mountain peak or sneaking through a shadowy Soviet installation, the picture remains aggressively sharp. You do not lose any of that meticulous environmental detail to a muddy upscaling filter. It is pure, raw visual clarity that completely ignores the fact that the game came out more than a decade ago.
Even if we don't find anything up here, your dad would be proud.
I know, but I have a good feeling about this. Whoa! Shit!
Final Fantasy XV. The Luminous engine was built specifically for this game, and while that decision probably contributed to the decade-long nightmare of actually finishing the thing, the results speak for themselves. This is one of the best-looking JRPGs ever made, and it's still holding up so well. I really think some of the environments and lighting looks better than the latest FF games even. Look, I know Final Fantasy XV is a slightly messy game. People have a lot of opinions on the story being chopped up, the combat, the whole DLC situation, but if we are strictly talking about graphics and games that still absolutely hold up, like, yeah, I think it needs to be here. Because I booted this up recently and I was just blown away all over again by what Square Enix pulled off so long ago. So obviously the game uses their in-house Luminous engine, and right out of the gate, when you were just pushing that broken down car in the desert, the lighting is crazy. It perfectly captures that feeling of a hot, exhausting road trip. When you finally get the Regalia running and you're just cruising down the highway, the reflections on the black paint, the way the harsh sunlight bleeds through the windshield and dynamically hits the boys in the car. It is just a good-ass looking game. They nailed the vibe of these massive, sprawling vistas. And I absolutely cannot talk about FF15 without talking about the food. Like, my god, you stop at a campsite, Ignis cooks up a meal, and they made the food look so absurdly photorealistic it makes you physically hungry in real life. The way the grease bubbles on a piece of meat or the steam comes off a bowl of stew. I remember reading that they actually cooked real camping food and meticulously modeled it just to get the textures right. That type of ridiculous, thick-headed attention to detail really calls to me. It makes the quiet moments at the camp feel incredibly grounded. And then, obviously, they went incredibly hard on the main 4 characters. The hair physics alone, the way it moves in the wind, the highly detailed leather jackets and silver jewelry. Sure, sometimes the background NPCs or some random rocky textures look a little janky, a little muddy if you look too close. It has its rough edges. But the core visual presentation of those 4 dudes hanging out, driving around, fighting monsters, it's flawless. It does a great job of simulating that specific road trip feel.
Good to know we still have people we can count on outside the city.
Crytek made a game in 2013 that was essentially a very expensive, very pretty tech demo wrapped around the shallowest combat system imaginable. And you know what? I'm still not mad about it. Ryse Son of Rome launched alongside the Xbox One as this flagship showcase of what next-gen graphics could achieve. And nearly 11 years later, it remains one of the best arguments for why raw visual fidelity, combined with actual artistic craft, can create something that doesn't age like milk. Yeah, the gameplay loop is more repetitive than a pop song chorus, but damn if it isn't gorgeous repetition. The character models in Ryse are borderline absurd in their detail, especially considering this was a 2013 launch title running on hardware that had just rolled off the assembly line. Marius Titus, your stoic Roman centurion protagonist, has armor that's rendered with such good attention that you can see individual scratches, dents, and wear patterns on every piece of metal. The way light catches on his Larica segmentata, those overlapping metal plates, creates this interplay of highlights and shadows that still competes with games released yesterday. And it's not just static detail either. The armor deforms slightly with movement, accumulates blood and dirt during combat, and reflects environmental lighting with proper material properties that make it feel like actual metal rather than a shiny texture slapped on a model. Facial animation is where Ryse really showed off what motion capture and high-fidelity character models could achieve when developers actually gave a damn. Marius's face tells the story even when the writing gets a bit hammy. You can see the grief, rage, and determination in his expressions during cutscenes. The skin shading is phenomenal, with proper subsurface scattering that makes faces look like actual flesh instead of plastic mannequins. Pores, stubble, scars, wrinkles, it's all rendered with this attention to detail that most developers didn't achieve until years later. When characters talk, their mouths actually form words convincingly, and their eyes track properly instead of staring dead-eyed into the void like so many early mocap attempts. But now, look, I'm not going to pretend Ryse Son of Rome is some overlooked masterpiece of game design. It's shallow, repetitive, and overstays its welcome by about 3 hours. But as a pure visual experience, as proof that gorgeous graphics can carry an otherwise mediocre game into worth experiencing territory, it absolutely succeeds. It's the kind of game you boot up to show off what your system can do, or to just zone out and enjoy the spectacle of Rome burning while you carve through barbarians in the most cinematic way possible. And honestly, there's something refreshing about a game that knows exactly what it is. A beautiful, violent, historically loose power fantasy that prioritizes looking incredible over deep mechanics. Not every game needs to be a 100-hour epic with branching narratives and complex systems. Sometimes you just want to wear gleaming Roman armor, march through historically inaccurate but gorgeous environments, and stab people with production values that still make modern studios look lazy. Now, this game really isn't as old as some of the other mentions here, but I just had to talk about it. Like, 4A games have their own proprietary engine, and they definitely nailed that post-apocalyptic, thick atmosphere that you can cut with a knife here. Like, the way light works when you are creeping through a collapsed, highly radioactive Russian bunker, and the only light source is your own flickering lighter or maybe the pale moon bleeding through a crack in a concrete ceiling. The way that soft light bounces off the damp walls, the rusted metal pipes, and the mutated stuff crawling around on the floor, it is absurd. Your brain stops seeing video game geometry and just registers absolute terrifying darkness. And I love games that force you to actually interact with the grime of the world, and Metro does that better than almost anything. You are out there in the wasteland and your gas mask gets physically cracked if you take damage. If a mutant jumps on you, they splatter blood and spit right across your visor, obscuring your vision. You physically have to hit a button for Artyom to raise his hand and wipe the mud and guts off the glass. Watching that animation, seeing the smear of dirt interact with the light as you wipe it away, it is immensely satisfying and highly stressful at the same time. It grounds you so heavily in that miserable reality. Then there are the weapons. You are carrying these tape-wrapped, desperately scrapped-together rifles, and as you crawl through the mud or get caught in a heavy storm, the weapon physically gets gunked up. You can see the thick dirt and sand accumulating on the receiver and the barrel over time, and you actually have to pull out a chemical bath at a workbench to scrub it clean. When you pull out your little lighter to burn away the thick spiderwebs in the tunnels, the small flame actually casts real-time moving shadows from Artyom's fingers onto the walls around you. And they pulled this off across totally different, massive biomes. The old Metro games were super claustrophobic, right? But here you get the train, the Aurora, moving across the country, and the environments totally shift. You go from the freezing, snowy ruins of Moscow to the Volga River with these massive, foggy swamps. Then you hit the Caspian Desert with these blinding hot sandstorms where the sun just bakes everything. And eventually you are in this lush, intensely overgrown taiga forest. The engine handles all of those distinct seasonal color palettes flawlessly. It definitely still has some of that stiff Eastern European jank in the movement sometimes, and the voice acting can be a little clunky, but strictly visually, it is an absolute masterclass in making a world feel dangerous, toxic, and incredibly real. Batman Arkham Knight jumped back into recently just looking for something cool to look at. I mean, we are sitting here today, and this game came out in what, 2015? That is wild to me, because this is just a good-ass looking game. If you played any modern open world game and you felt like the cities looked a little plasticky or flat, you need to look at Gotham and Arkham Knight. The game is straight up just a masterclass in art direction, hiding any technical limitations. Most of it really is the raw visual impact of the rain. It's always raining, and you do that in this third-person perspective, right? You're looking at Batman's back for hours. But the way the water physically pools on the cape, the way the droplets run down the carbon fiber of the Batsuit, it just feels and looks incredible. You have this incredibly detailed character model, and over the course of the entire game, his suit gets ripped up, the metal gets scratched, the cape gets bullet holes in it. You can kind of take it slow and really, every detail on that suit is deliberate. The secret sauce here is definitely the art direction. Rocksteady didn't try to make a brightly lit, perfectly clean, photorealistic city. They went for this oppressive, hyper-detailed, eternal nightmare of a Halloween night. It is always raining, and that rain is doing so much heavy lifting. And then there's the Batmobile. I know people have mixed feelings on the tank battles, but strictly visually, calling that thing in and watching it tear around a corner, smashing through stone pillars and iron fences like they're made of paper, it is an absolute spectacle. The particle effects are insane. You drift through an intersection and sparks are flying, debris is scattering everywhere, the neon signs from the diner are reflecting in the wet, muddy asphalt. It creates this overwhelming sense of speed and chaos, and the engine just handles the destruction perfectly. Sure, the game was notoriously janky on PC when it launched. A lot of people had a really bad time with the performance back then, and it was a whole mess. But going back to it now on modern hardware, when you're gliding over Gotham and you dive bomb down into an alleyway lit purely by an orange streetlight and the glowing red eyes of the Arkham Knight's militia, it is just flawless. Your brain just gets tricked by the lighting and the shadows. You aren't sitting there counting pixels or looking at texture resolution, you are just completely immersed in this grimy, nasty version of Gotham. I honestly didn't expect to be this impressed all over again, but the guys at Rocksteady really created a visual benchmark here. It's definitely one of those games I'll keep installed just to fly around in when I want to see something cool and atmospheric.
Say goodnight, Batman. We're gonna mess you up.
Tomb Raider Underworld. Now this is another Tomb Raider game that I want to mention just because I also recently replayed it. This was right in the middle of the Xbox 360 and PS3 lifecycle, a time when a massive chunk of the industry was obsessed with making every single game look like it was dragged through a gray and brown dirt filter and a shitty piss filter. I hated that so much, especially with games like GTA 4. Like, yeah, it's a great game, but the colors really start to hurt my eyes after some time. But anyway, Crystal Dynamics drops Underworld, and the coastal Thailand level alone completely seals the show. You pull up on your boat, look at those massive sun-drenched limestone cliffs jutting out of the crystal clear water, and the vibrant greens and blues just strike you immediately. It is a massive breath of fresh air. They actually remembered that video games are allowed to use the entire color palette. The lighting engine they put together for this was doing a ton of heavy lifting for the time. When you were deep inside one of those ancient Mayan ruins down in southern Mexico, the way the bright sunlight punches through the cracks in the ceiling and illuminates the dust floating in the air looks fantastic. It gives everything a really thick, adventurous vibe. And one more thing besides the graphics, like I think I've said it before on this channel, but this is still genuinely my favorite Lara Croft design. Like they completely nailed exactly who she is supposed to be. She is highly adventurous, cool, and with a personality that perfectly captures the classic Tomb Raider legacy. The character model is fantastic, the outfits are iconic, and you are spending the entire game watching her navigate these massive, crazy ruins, so having a really nice Lara design actually matters. And when you were scuba diving in the Mediterranean Sea right at the beginning, the deep blues of the water and the bright shafts of sunlight breaking through the surface are just gorgeous. And in the gameplay, when you were swinging from poles, doing these crazy acrobatic flips, and her animations just flow perfectly against these incredibly bright backdrops. It gives you that full, immense satisfaction of exploring lost tombs while actually being able to see all the intricate carvings and environmental details clearly. Alright, shifting gears to a game that literally defined a whole new era of Unreal Engine muscle, Gears of War 4. When the Coalition took over the franchise back in 2016, they had massive, meaty shoes to fill, and they decided to do it by pushing Unreal Engine 4. Playing it now, it is a wildly sobering experience. We are sitting around in the current year waiting for day one patches to fix stuttering in $100 games, while JD Phoenix and his crew are out here running flawlessly through some of the most chaotic, visually dense environments ever built without dropping a single sweaty frame. The game is an absolute masterclass in making a grimy, ruined world look ridiculously rich and vibrant. The planet Sarah is basically throwing a permanent temper tantrum, and these massive, monstrous storms called wind flares rip across the map. We're not talking about a cheap, transparent rain filter slapped over the camera to fake a storm. These weather events physically and violently alter the battlefield. You get this phenomenal particle physics showcase where debris, dirt, and literal lightning bolts are tearing through the environment. The wind actively pushes against the heavy, chunky armor the characters are wearing. Even the crumbling, overgrown architecture of the abandoned cities looks incredibly tangible, with damp moss and cracked stone that genuinely looks like it has been sitting there rotting in the sun for 20 years.
Holy shit!
We gotta clear this wall!